Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought, the podcast where we explore the forces shaping the future of the automotive industry. I'm your host, Guido Vildozo. Today, we're focusing on what's changing for North American automakers in 2026 and beyond. While the key megatrends of electrification, regionalization, Chinese competition, technological transformation, and supply chain resilience are all familiar themes, these trends are now evolving to create a more fragmented and complex operating environment. Our latest white paper, The Next Phase of Automotive Megatrends, explores how regulatory uncertainty, affordability pressures, shifting consumer expectations, and global supply risks are shaping strategy for OEMs across the US, Canada, and Mexico. Joining me today are Henner Lena, Vice President of Research and Analysis, and Peter Nagel, Research and Analysis Associate Director, the authors of these latest insights. We'll discuss what's truly different in this next phase and what leaders should be doing now to prepare. Welcome, Henner and Peter. Henner, let's get started with you. Let's talk about the big picture. Why is 2026 such a pivotal moment for North American automakers? What has fundamentally changed in their operating environment?
Hi, Guido. Thank you for having us here. Yeah, it's a very good question. 2026 was anticipated to be the year of normalization, where after a long road of changes, disruptions with COVID, with chip crisis, with the rejuggling of the tariff world, we would go back into a more normal planning mode with some stability, which this industry definitely needs, long-term planning, certainty for long product life cycles. And in areas we see this, where there is a little bit of stabilization coming, but there's also a lot of questions still out there. And that is really the pivotal part for the car makers. There's pretty much the reduction of EV and emission compliance, which is no longer facing a scaling pressure. Now there's a race to rebuild conventional powertrain offerings or hybridizing as an alternative to offerings. And how quickly can you get that to market? And also how quickly can you get back to the margin you need in order to have, in the end, a profitable operating business? There will be higher structural labor costs coming. The cost from the tariff situation is also still in question because not only importers are suffering from some of these tariffs, but as well as domestic manufacturers. Will these passed on to the consumer? Who is moving first? Are those absorbed? By other measures, will the cost not go up? There's big questions which we're looking at. And then on top, we have a normalization of demand. There's no more recovery. Actually, for this year in North America, we even forecast a slight decline in sales and the production output. So it's going to be not a market on a growth path, which is making things a little bit more difficult than maybe in last years where overproportional growth in light of the recovery was seen. And last, I think there is the USMCA renegotiation, especially for North America. It will redefine how the automotive industry will operate going forward in North America in regards to how to source components, vehicles, and how will they be pretty much made available in a highly integrated automotive environment. And will that still exist going forward in this way we know it today?
Peter, on electrification, we're seeing BEV growth plateau in some regions while hybrids gain momentum. Is this hybrid resurgence a temporary adjustment or a longer-term structural shift?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Guido, for having me on here. Great question here because it touches on some of the other themes here for the megatrends discussion, regionalization, alternative powertrain strategies, and how we're seeing different OEMs pivot to some of these changes. And I probably would start with breaking the question down into its two parts. So hybrid resurgence is a very real thing, especially here in the US. We're just seeing pretty strong growth rates across the board and mostly on the back of limited incentives within the marketplace. So there is a strong natural demand for this. Consumers are looking for ways to reduce their emissions costs or at least their spending on fuel and refueling. And hybrids are offering a solution here that is meeting their needs without really tipping the scales too much into the electrification side of the market, some of the uncertainties there around charging access, charging times, and obviously affordability being a major hurdle here in the near term. So that first part, it is not temporary. We're seeing portfolios expand across non-traditional manufacturers, so outside of the Asian-led development in the space. And we're really starting to see those products proliferate as internal combustion engine becomes a piece of that hybrid technology here going forward. Now, the longer term structural shift is an interesting question in and of itself, especially when we talk about different regions. Here in the US, the Trump administration followed through with its promises to really shift the regulatory landscape, the removal of the IRA credits hampering affordability. Some of those could theoretically be reinstituted or reconfigured under future administrations. But the path towards a Biden or an Obama era compliance likely to be a thing of the past. More hybrids are going to be a feature of our forecast going forward here in the US and North America writ large. And when we look at other regions, primarily China and Europe, those hybrid momentum is a little bit softer here because those longer term electrification targets, while they have shifted, have only really been delayed, where we've seen really a whole scale reconfiguration of the US compliance and regulatory landscape that is obviously favored hybrid development and is expected to continue to do so strongly going forward.
Thank you, Peter. Henner, how should OEMs navigate the increasingly fragmented regulatory landscape across US states, Canadian provinces, and Mexico?
That's a good question, Guido. A couple of years ago, we put out the term forecasting the never normal. And this is unfortunately still the challenge. And the only recipe we see there is you need to change the way you plan significantly. Many car makers are still planning on an annual basis. One long-term plan takes them months and months in order to put that together. That needs to change. You need to go more frequent in real-time actualization, also have the guts in the end to change plans in flight in order to adjust to the constant changing environment you're in. And then on top, of course, you need to be doing scenario planning. Scenario planning is the key. One number out there is not really feasible anymore. You need to plan in bandwidth so you can prepare yourself, your organization, but also your outside partners like the suppliers for possible ranges of outcomes, depending on how wide or how narrow you look at these scenarios. And this is something where we started looking at ourselves a couple of years back and more driving into the market, because there is no way around that you plan in scenarios, especially in times like these.
No questions asked, Henner. Risk mitigation is becoming the name of the game. Pete, if we start to focus on incentives becoming less predictable, and along the lines of what Henner just said and some of the planning that we need to do, what will drive organic consumer demand for electrified vehicles in North America?
This is a great question, because how I tend to view it is it the vehicle, the powertrain, or is it the total package? I mean, here in the US, compelling product, consumer taste always win out. And if we were to just even look at the EV landscape, how do you have certain products like the Tesla Model Y that are outrageously successful, but similar competing products within that same segment, like Ford Mustang Mach-E or the Volkswagen ID.4, similarly priced, similarly equipped, fail to resonate with the consumer. So I answer this question the same if we were talking about EVs, hybrids, internal combustion engine driven products. It really is, the specific product. Does it meet a compelling case to attract that consumer? Or is it something that's just trying to maybe meet a regulatory threshold, check a box in a portfolio, help automakers with what were previous compliance targets, or just to serve as a test bed for the technology? The really successful products are the ones that meet that consumer where they are, that offer a compelling offer, both in terms of technology, equipment, pricing, And again, some of the hardest things to predict in the industry, right, is the styling, is the kind of atmosphere when that product is launched. Is it timed right? Does it meet the market? Is it able to catch fire like that? And so, really, that's going to be the case for each automakers going forward here. Is that product is going to have to really meet those consumer needs immediately without incentive support, without regulatory drivers, without some of the state and local programs that have been supporting vehicles. It's going to be incumbent on those to find their audience, to find their consumers, to really craft that offer that's going to meet it, whether it's going to be with cheaper batteries, less range? Is it going to be more technology and assistance systems, driver assistance systems in the vehicle? Or is it going to be something as mundane as styling and just making a product that quote unquote seems cool that people want to drive? That is going to be really the case going forward. We've seen EV demand, in particular here in the US post September, really crater. We are entering to the earlier question on why is 2026 going to be so pivotal. It is a period of intense product launch activity. A lot of programs have been delayed post COVID, post chip crisis, and really post tariff and election uncertainty. Those products are coming to market over the next 12 to 18 months, and it's really going to be a sink or swim moment for a lot of new offerings in the marketplace. And so while individually each product might not find success, the key for the industry writ large, if we're looking at electrification being still a goal, is collectively, do these products launching, do they encompass a broader range of consumer tastes, consumer preferences than the current portfolio does? Because only then will we see expanded demand growth here for the powertrain writ large. And those automakers, if we were to just kind of pick out a product, looking at Rivian, trying to make the push down in segment, down in price, appealing to a broader swath of audience, is that product going to be successful at really expanding that company's reach, similar to what the Tesla Model Y did when it launched? Those are going to be pivotal products, pivotal in the grander scheme of the industry. And again, do they capture that consumer hearts and minds when they launch? Because they will need to be successful on their own merits post September here in the US.
Hannah, grabbing the thought process that Pete just went through and particularly latching on to unpredictability, let's talk about Chinese OEMs and their limited presence in the US. Where is the real competitive pressure coming from today?
There are a couple answers to this question. So even though there's no real Chinese presence in the US market yet, the adjacent markets visibly has it. In Mexico, we see activity. In Canada, is discussing activity. And then if you go further south, into South America or Latin America, Middle America, it's clearly present. Chinese made an inroad there. And it's really part of the market already with very strong ambitions to further grow this position. So there is clearly a Chinese competition for the US industry, just not yet in the US. And it's also, on second, it's a technology race. The past couple of years have shown building a profitable EV, market-leading EV, is not as simple as many of the traditional players thought. Many big names, traditional ones, have tried it, the first EVs into the market, and they were mediocre at best. Everybody wanted to become the second Tesla, and nobody really succeeded. And the Chinese, with their development cycles, they are really speeding up their developments in that space. And even though, to what Peter just described, the EV at the moment is not a leading segment in the US market, it will be at some point. The world is turning electric. It takes longer than expected, but electrification is at the forefront. And so there, the question is, how do you compete with a technology player or even leader, even not if it's in your market, but still keeping up the pace in regards to innovation, while in the domestic home market, it might not be at the moment the vehicle category of choice. And then another, if you talk about real competition outside the Chinese, of course, there's a race for hybridization. Also, Peter mentioned it, right? Profitable, scalable, full hybrid vehicles, which ensure good fuel economy, is something the American consumer is actually buying. And most of these leading systems are coming at the moment from the Japanese or the Korean car makers. So the bar is quite high there because they started a while ago already to offer full model lines only as hybrid versions, and will do so more and more across their model offering. And so this is actually a short or midterm competition the domestic industry will need to watch out for and to have a matching answer in regards to not connection to that development.
Thank you, Henner. Peter, let's expand on Henner's earlier comment and the presence of Chinese OEMs in Mexico. How significant is Mexico as a gateway for indirect competition and evolving supply chains, particularly looking at the renegotiation that is up and coming for USMCA?
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest hurdle that the industry is going to have to clear in 2026, right? The July deadline for USMCA renegotiation is already proving quite contentious. If we were to read the tea leaves and read the tweets, there is some loggerheads building, and Chinese presence being maybe the paramount issue for how the US is going to frame these talks. So some of the inroads Chinese have already made in Mexico that are hoping to make in Canada are going to be points of contention when the US comes to negotiate in earnest and really tries to drill down. I would say Mexico, maybe I don't want to use the phrase indirect competition, but I would say Mexico is a gateway to competition, to new technologies, to diversification. It's a much broader market in terms of the pricing variation within the market, the portfolios of vehicles being offered more unique and tailored to the local audience than we have here in the US and Canada, which tend to share, most of the portfolio between the two markets. Mexico has always been more of a test bed for some of this technology, for moving away from, say, some of the high value add manufacturing. Mexico has picked up a lot of that. So Mexico was, in a sense, prior to some of the recent contention here, our bulwark against Chinese manufacturing and Chinese technology entering the North American supply chain. So it's strange to see that we start to think about Mexico as really a gateway where some of that technology could be kind of used as a throughput into the US. So if we were to just take specific components, right? If we look at tires, we look at batteries, we look at wire harnesses being one of the dramatic ones. The second largest supplier to a lot of the US industry outside of Mexico is China. So that shows how strong and impactful USMCA has been to drive regional developments. But the competing national interests have set up this discussion where, are we going to mandate within USMCA that supply chains remain free of Chinese technology or Chinese components, right? If suppliers set up shop in Mexico, they're not just doing that to supply the Mexican market, they're looking to supply all of North America. And so a lot of those key contentious points for USMCA are really going to focus on local content, on labor value add, and then on some of the technology restrictions that the US has proposed on limiting Chinese software, Chinese integration. Those are going to be, again, potential speed bumps here during the negotiation. I would say evolving supply chain strategies are going to work through Mexico, just given its open trading relationship with a lot of other markets here, especially more so than the US and Canada. That is going to be a key fulcrum for a lot of these technologies either making their way into the US, but on the flip side, US technologies, US vehicles, US suppliers getting access to the rest of the world as well. So that door does swing both ways. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but a lot of USMCA is going to focus on impacts to limit the Chinese, to limit investment, and really to drive domestic content and, in particular, US content throughout the supply chain.
Henner, we've seen regionalization gain momentum due to tariffs, trade policy shifts, and supply chain disruptions. How are North American automakers rebalancing global efficiency with regional resilience?
It's a good question. The world we are seeing emerging, and we're not seeing it now, we already see that since a couple of years, is a three-speed world. Three regions, three strategies, and these directional separations have only accelerated in recent months. And the strategy is more local for local. So you have the Chinese region, where you have a specific requirements to technologies, to products, to costs. And because of some of the reasons we just discussed about, some of these offerings cannot be either sold in Europe and especially not sold in the US. Then you have the European market, which is also on an electrification path, also very specific, but on an electrification path, which, let's say, limited battery footprints, for example, and a very strong still sustainability angle to it. And then you have the US market, which has a decoupling of that, as we just discussed, where it's back to ICE at the moment, no compliance, and different consumer demands are taking place. So you have these three regions, three speeds, three strategies. And in the end, the rebalancing of the global efficiency is very tricky because there is no global car anymore. The global vehicle is a thing of the past. You will need to have good global component sourcing, to also what Peter just said. But in the end, you would tailor your offering in the core to the market. So that is key, something going forward, and part of the rebalancing of the strategies some of the car makers will have to do. And especially if you look at some of the North American ones, then you have either a in the market for the market approach. Some have a little bit of overseas business, still a little bit China business, but there's not that much globalization actually left, majority of the offerings. And there the question is, can you get back into the game for doing some of this rebalancing, or do you focus on the markets you're in and trying to succeed there and win there as another regional resilience strategy?
Thank you, Henner. Let's shift gears here a little bit onto what seems to be still a global topic. Peter, let's talk about tech premium pricing. Where OEMs are charging for connected features, driver assistance, and subscriptions. Is this a sustainable growth lever?
This is a very interesting question from both dynamics, right? The consumers love these features. They are willing to pay a premium, even though affordability constraint has been really a feature for the industry since the chip crisis back in 2022. So consumers are looking for a cheaper vehicle. Why aren't they opting out of some of these connectivity, these infotainment, these driver assist systems? And the answer is that they're popular. Consumers want them, they're willing to pay for them, and automakers seem happy to supply them. I chuckle at the beginning because the question is phrased as, is this a sustainable growth lever? And it's really, maybe this is a question to pose back to the OEMs is, can they afford to remove these features from consumers? Will you see demand fall as a result because they are so popular? So consumers are kind of two minds, right? They think it's a bad time to buy a vehicle. Prices are high. Interest rates are still elevated. Affordability and monthly payments are under pressure. But if you ask them, say, do you want to give up your heated leather seats? Do you want to get away from your park assist systems? And the answer is going to be no. Once the consumer's in them, they tend to want these features going forward. So it's sustainable in that sense that automakers are going to need to continue to offer vehicles with these services. That's a definite. Is it going to be sustainable and a driver of growth? That's the trickier question, because if we want to make vehicles more affordable, automakers are going to need to adjust pricing while still maintaining a lot of these features that consumers have grown accustomed to. And that's really going to be the difficult needle to thread. And is it really a growth driver, or is it a differentiator? That would be my other question, right? So if a consumer's looking in the market for a vehicle, it's not that the vehicle technology is bringing them to market, but it is going to drive that decision between brand A with the feature and brand B without the feature, to the benefit of those automakers who are giving those consumers, again, the earlier question, crafting that intriguing product with the right mix of features at the right price that is going to win the day here. And that's really going to be under increasing focus here as a strategy that's been well developed in the past when the Japanese came to market, when the Koreans came to market. It's offering, more technology, more features for the same price as your traditional D3 or European product in the market. Is that trend likely to continue? Our automakers going to have to really intensify those efforts to bring new technology and make it affordable going forward to sustain that demand. That is definitely going to be where the market heads in 26. And even going forward here, consumers are just loath to give up a feature they've grown accustomed to, even if that saves them a couple bucks per month on a monthly payment. They're going to always option into that technology that they've grown accustomed to.
Thank you, Peter. Henner, supply chain resilience is now a board level issue. What does proactive strategic resilience look like compared to the reactive approach we used to have in the past?
As I mentioned earlier, the key to success here is more frequent planning and continuous scenario planning. So do those two elements. You need to update your plan more quickly to see, are we still on track? And you continuously need to spin up scenarios to see, where is my resilience? Where are my pressure points? And make that part of your standard planning workflow, which is often the biggest hurdle. The answer we're getting a lot is, this is how we've been doing it since years, right? Why should we change? Or, oh, there's so many people involved. We cannot go through all these departments and change that. But this is something to, if you really want to have resilience, you need to really look into your planning. And one big aspect of that is not just the process, but then how you do it. The digitalization of your workflows. Excel will not do the trick anymore. The world is too complex, too fast changing, that created scenario will actually allow you to stay on top of what's going on right now. By the time you have set that up in Excel and calculated it through, pretty much the world moved on already. And even worse, if you even invested the time and build a good scenario, Excel based or non-digital, then you might want to update it. And this is where then most of these approaches fall apart, because a constant scenario, maybe about what we just talked about, the expansion of Chinese brands, Mexico, or the entry of the Canadian market, this is something you want to continuously track and actualize and see, okay, is our jump off, our start assumption still valid? Or maybe has something already outpaced what we actually only saw in a couple of years coming. And therefore, digitalization is key. And then in line of that, once you have that set, you need to do a constant monitoring of your supply chain. And this will cost you money. And we have seen that very often through the various crises we have seen in past decades. Very often when the crisis, everybody wants to know what's going on down to tier 3 level supply chain. Where are things coming from? And we need to be on top of everything now. But then once the crisis is over, the cost controller takes over, and maybe we do tier 1 monitoring, and that's it. And that is also, again, in this very unstable environment we're operating in, and this unstable environment will not go away. This is not the way to operate. So again, technology, mapping, constant mapping of your supply chain and creating full transparency, or partner with somebody who can actually provide that, will be key to, again, identify these pressure points and not be reactive and pretty much wait till things turn bad and then react, which is something you cannot afford these days anymore.
Great points on scenario planning, Henner. No question about it. Obviously, speed and urgency are critical to anything that comes up ahead. Pete, for a final question, if you're advising an OEM leadership team today, what are the top priorities they should be focused on to lead, not just respond to these evolving megatrends?
Yeah, I want to say, Guido, thank you for giving Henner most of the trickier questions for this discussion here, with the exception of this one, because this one really depends on which OEM we're going to talk to, right? There are, Henner mentioned the 3-speed world, and it's really about how each OEM wants to position themselves within this different environment. So I guess my first answer would be, if I were to advise any leadership team, I would piggyback on Henner's answer and just trying to be as prepared as possible. The market is changing, having different options at your fingertips and being able to react with speed as the environment changes, either to confirm or even to deny some of your assumptions. Being prepared with a strategy in place sooner rather than later is always going to be beneficial. And if we were talking again in generalities, I think the other thing I would say to most OEMs is focusing on your priorities. Is what are you good at? Where do you want to be? Do you see yourselves as a global OEM with a portfolio that can meet these diverse needs with a group of products? Or do you really want to focus in on your key segments, your key markets, your key revenue drivers, right? Focusing on the old 80-20 principle, I guess, would be the best analogy, is really doing the business that you do well, focusing on improving that, and then trying to identify those portions of the business that are either draining resources, draining costs, not proving to meet those initial targets or those targets you guys set out for the business to begin with, and really trying to grow by trimming that portfolio and again focusing in on those key areas of competency and being prepared in those competencies to respond as the market continues to evolve over the course of this year. And obviously, if the past is any guide here, some of the transitions we can expect as we move towards the 2030s.
Great insights, Pete. Thank you, Peter, Henner, for walking us through how these megatrends are evolving for North American automakers. It's been a pleasure having you on the call today. For those of you that are listening, Henner and Pete spent the better part of the last 15 years working together. And the takeaway is clear. Electrification is becoming more nuanced, competition is more indirect, and technology-driven. Regionalization is reshaping strategy, and supply chain resilience is now a core competitive capability. For listeners who want to explore the data, developments to watch, and strategic checklists in more detail, please download our white paper, The Next Phase of Automotive Megatrends. Thank you for tuning in to this month's Fuel for Thought. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and explore our latest automotive insights. We'll be back next month with another episode.